or I'll see something about the lost and I'll cry. And it's not my personality. It's because I'm a new creature in Jesus Christ. And God gives you a different kind of a heart. That's what the Bible's talking about when it talks about being born again. Not of water, but of the Spirit. Spiritual birth. New life in Jesus Christ. And one of the benefits is a different heart. And that comes naturally when you get saved. Frank, can I say to you that Jonah was truly the man of God, but he did not have a tender heart? Jonah was truly the man of God, but he did not have a tender heart. Matter of fact, he was hard-hearted. Here's what's happening. The mariners are in the sea, and all of a sudden great waves and a great storm has risen up. And they are terrified. And they are faint-hearted. And Jonah is asleep. He's asleep. He's sleeping. Why do you think he was sleeping? Because he had a hard heart. He was asleep because he had a hard heart. He didn't care. Last week we saw that Jonah deliberately fled from the presence of God. And when he fled from the presence of God, he did not assume or think in his mind that he could get away from omnipresent God. He fled from fellowship with God. He fled from fellowship with God. Christian, can I say to you, when you make the decision to go into sin, see, Christians, if you believe this philosophy that many people teach that it's only a sin if you know it's a sin, but Christians don't really go into sin, baloney. You know, I want to tell you the truth. Almost every sin I've ever committed, I knew I was sinning. I've heard it preached that presumptuous sin is knowing it's sin before you commit the sin. That's not what presumptuous sin is in the Scripture. We won't preach about that tonight. But I've known that I sinned when I sinned, and you did too if you're honest about it. You didn't all of a sudden do something and then say, I mean, we've been taken unawares, haven't we? Well, the devil sets traps and pitfalls. He does for me all the time. And I get sucked into things. But I knew better. In other words, I was knowledgeable. Matter of fact, and folks use James 4:17, therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is a sin. I just want to tell you, the more I grow in the faith, the more I know when I sin. And that's just honest. Same's true for you too. When Jonah fled from the presence of God, his purpose was to get out of fellowship. His purpose was to harden his own heart. And he succeeded. Jonah succeeded in hardening his heart. Let's look at the contrast. The mariners in verse 5 were afraid and cried every man unto his God. The mariners were seeking spirituality. Jonah says, I don't want a relationship with God. And the mariners said, we want a relationship with a God. We want to be spiritual. And I want to tell you something. Many individuals worship false gods with a more tender heart than we sometimes have toward the God. Creator God, real God. And they come to Jonah and they are surprised at his attitude. We'd probably be surprised too if we were them, wouldn't we? Here you are, you're about to go down. There's waves like these fellows have never seen in their lives, and they're in peril like they've never been in before. And here's the guy sleeping. What are you doing? He's sleeping. I'm telling you, Christian, it is entirely possible for you and I to know the Lord, to be legitimately justified in Jesus Christ, and to be hard-hearted. And just say, I don't care. Can I say to you this evening, it's because you have deliberately gone out of fellowship? You know, when we go out of fellowship, we do it because we don't want to have a tender heart. And Jonah wanted to hate. He wanted to hate the Ninevites, and so he went from the presence of God. Not because he thought he physically could escape God's presence, but because he wanted to not have a relationship with God. He said, God, I'd rather not have a relationship with you than give up my hate. God, I'd rather not have a relationship with you than give up my bitterness. Christian, if you're holding on to bitterness, you are doing so in preference of a relationship with God. If you are holding on to bitterness and hatred in your heart, let's be honest, you're doing so in preference of a relationship with God. And the unbelievers saw that that was wrong. The hard-hearted were God's people. Jonah was sleeping in verse 6. So the shipmaster came to him and said unto him, What meanest thou, O sleeper? What do you mean, sleeper? What's wrong with you? I want to go wake somebody up and say, What meanest thou, O sleeper? What does the book of Proverbs say? He that blesseth his friend with a loud voice rising up early in the morning, it shall be counted a curse to him. I like to quote to my roommates, As the door turneth upon his hinges, so is a slothful man upon his bed. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that travelleth, and thy want as an armed man. I like to pick on sleepers. Don't pick on me when I sleep. You're welcome to. You can wake me up anytime you want, and I'll be fine. I actually wake up pretty cheerfully under normal circumstances. Well, Jonah comes and they said, What do you mean, sleeper? What meanest thou, O sleeper? Danny, wake up your wife that way tomorrow. What meanest thou, O sleeper? I dare you. Lord, get up first, so he can't. Wake him up. So the shipmaster came to him and said unto him, What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy capital G-O-D. Capital G-O-D. They knew who Jonah was. And they knew that his God was different than their small caps. No, there's no such thing as small caps. Lowercase G-O-D. Isn't that interesting? They knew their gods were petty and trivial and weak. And when they saw the individual who was a recognized, legitimate prophet of God, they said, What in the world is wrong here? Get up! Christians, I'm telling you something. There are individuals that watch you. They know your God is real. And they cannot figure out why you're sleeping. There are individuals who are watching you. They know your God is real and they can't figure out why you're asleep. He's saved. Why do those words come out of his mouth? He knows the Lord. Why doesn't he live for God? He could have victory over that sin, and yet they know you about your God, and they know about you. And these folks are about to know God in a real way, capital G. And they came to him and they said, Arise, call upon thy God, if so be that God will think upon us, that we perish not. They knew Jonah had access to God. Not gods, God. They knew that. And they said, We don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. I want to show you something else. These individuals not only understood why Jonah ought to have a right relationship with God, but they had compassion in their hearts. I don't know about you, but it bothers me when one person puts everybody else in danger. It's bad when one person risks the neck of everyone else. It's always a bad idea, parents with teenagers, to let teenage kids ride with teenage kids in the car. Inevitably, you have a driver that wants to show their abilities. As it's true, isn't it, Mr. Marino? Inevitably, you have a driver that wants to show his or her abilities to drive, and they risk everybody else's lives in doing so. I don't know how many times when I was a teenager, there were unsafe things done while I was in a vehicle and utterly out of control and couldn't stop the people doing it. That's wrong, to endanger others. And these lost folks cannot understand why Jonah would endanger them. They know he knows God, capital G.